You are exhausting yourself trying to fix people who do not want to be fixed. You think you are helping them by shielding them from their own mistakes, but you are only delaying their reality. Today, you will learn the hardest lesson of all: how to step back, let them fall, and reclaim your own mind. If you are tired of carrying burdens that do not belong to you, listen closely. This is where you take your power back.
Welcome to True Stoic Journal, the path to inner control.
Shielding someone from consequences does not remove the cause. It delays the recognition. It softens the impact that would otherwise create change. Over time, this delay extends the pattern, allowing it to repeat with minimal resistance. The Stoic sees that true correction does not come from avoidance. It comes from contact with reality in its full form, without interference that weakens its effect. Confucius pointed toward the structure of this learning when he said, "He who learns but does not think is lost. He who thinks but does not learn is in great danger." And within that statement, there is a balance between experience and reflection that cannot be separated. A person must both encounter and examine what they encounter. If either side is missing, understanding does not take hold. The Stoic recognizes that their role is not to replace this process, but to allow it to occur. They remain present, aware, and steady. Yet they do not interrupt the sequence that leads to growth. There is a discipline required to step back when every instinct suggests stepping forward, especially when the outcome appears preventable from a distance. The Stoic does not ignore what is happening. They see it fully without distortion, without denial. Yet they choose not to interfere with the process that must unfold. This choice is not passive. It is deliberate. It requires control over the impulse to act prematurely. And it maintains alignment with a deeper understanding of how change occurs. When consequences are allowed to carry their full weight, something shifts within the person experiencing them. The repetition begins to slow. The pattern becomes harder to ignore. The connection between action and outcome becomes more visible. This is where real adjustment begins. Not from instruction, but from direct realization. The Stoic respects this process by not interfering with it. They allow the lesson to arrive in its full form without dilution. There is also a preservation that takes place within the Stoics when they hold this position. Their energy remains intact. Their focus remains directed. They are not pulled into cycles that repeat without resolution. Instead, they remain grounded, observing the unfolding without becoming part of it. This distance is not a separation from reality. It is aligned with it, allowing it to operate without unnecessary interference. As this understanding settles, the urge to rescue begins to fade. It is replaced by a steady awareness that each person must walk through their own outcomes to arrive at their own understanding. The Stoic remains where they are, composed, aware, and steady, allowing events to unfold while maintaining their own direction. Within a world that continues to move according to the actions of those within it, there is an influence that moves quietly through a person's life, shaping thought, behavior, and direction without ever announcing itself. And it often goes unnoticed because it feels familiar. Because it blends into the routine and environment. The Stoic begins to recognize that what surrounds them is not neutral. Every interaction, every voice, every repeated pattern leaves a trace. Over time, those traces begin to form a structure. And that structure either strengthens discipline or weakens it. This awareness does not create fear. It creates attention. It sharpens the way a person observes their surroundings. Not with judgment, but with understanding. What is present begins to matter more than what is said. There are environments where disorder becomes normal. Where distraction replaces focus. Where reactions are constant and reflection is rare. And in those environments, behavior begins to adjust without conscious effort. The Stoic sees how easily this happens. How quickly repetition creates familiarity. And how familiarity reduces resistance. What once felt unstable begins to feel acceptable. What once required effort begins to happen automatically. This shift is gradual, almost invisible. Yet its impact is significant. It alters direction without a clear moment of change. Seneca offered guidance that aligns directly with this awareness when he wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." And within that statement, there is a decision that must be made with intention. Improvement does not occur by chance. It is shaped by exposure, by repetition, by the standards that surround a person daily. The Stoic does not leave this to circumstance. They observe who they spend time with. What is reinforced through those interactions? And how it affects their thinking. This observation leads to an adjustment. Not through rejection, but through alignment. Selective association is often misunderstood as distance from others. Yet, the Stoics approach it differently. It is not about removing people without reason. It is about understanding influence and choosing where to remain. A person does not need to engage with every environment to understand it. They do not need to participate in every pattern to recognize its direction. The Stoic remains aware of what surrounds them. Yet they choose where to stay and where to step back. This choice preserves direction and reduces unnecessary friction. There is also an internal layer that cannot be ignored. Attraction to certain environments reveals something about the current state of a person. If disorder feels familiar. If distraction feels comfortable. If instability feels engaging. Then there is something within that aligns with it. The Stoic does not avoid this realization. They examine it closely without resistance, without judgment. Because understanding it leads to change. What is chosen externally often reflects what exists internally. Aristotle approached this from the foundation of self-awareness when he said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." And within that idea is the recognition that environment and identity are connected. The Stoic does not only adjust what surrounds them. They refine what exists within them. As self-awareness increases, the pull towards certain environments begins to shift. What once felt engaging may begin to feel draining. What once felt normal may begin to feel misaligned. This shift guides future decisions. Surrounding oneself with discipline reinforces discipline in ways that do not require effort to maintain. It creates a standard that is visible, repeatable, and consistent. The Stoic moves toward this environment with intention. Not because it guarantees ease, but because it supports direction. In contrast, remaining within instability introduces constant resistance. It requires effort to maintain a position. It divides attention. Over time, that division weakens focus and reduces progress. The decision becomes practical rather than emotional. Where attention is placed determines what is reinforced. Where time is spent determines what becomes familiar. The Stoic evaluates these factors without attachment, making adjustments where necessary to protect their path. This does not require explanation to others. It does not require approval. It is a quiet shift that prioritizes alignment over comfort. As this discipline develops, the association becomes more deliberate, more refined and more aligned with the direction the Stoic has chosen. The world remains filled with noise, with distraction, with patterns that repeat without awareness. Yet within that, the Stoic moves with intention, choosing where to stand, where to engage, and where to remain apart, while maintaining a steady position within their own structure. There is a point where observation begins to replace assumption, where repeated patterns become impossible to ignore, and what once seemed unpredictable starts to follow a familiar path. The Stoic watches closely, not with frustration, but with attention, seeing how the same decisions lead to the same outcomes again and again. It becomes evident that behavior is rarely accidental. It follows a structure that is reinforced through repetition. The desire to intervene begins to rise in response to this, driven by the belief that awareness alone can shift the direction of another person. This belief carries weight because it feels responsible, because it feels active, because it gives the sense that something can be done. The instinct to step in often arrives with urgency, especially when the outcome appears visible before it happens. When the path ahead seems clear from a distance, a person sees the mistake forming, sees the consequences approaching, and feels the need to redirect it before it unfolds. The Stoic pauses within this moment, not to suppress the instinct, but to examine it. There is something beneath it that requires attention. The discomfort of watching avoidable patterns creates pressure, and that pressure seeks release through action. Without examination, that action becomes automatic, and the cycle begins to repeat from the observer's side as well. Marcus Aurelius expressed the boundary of control with direct clarity when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And within that statement, there is a line that does not shift depending on circumstance. The Stoic holds this line firmly. Control remains internal. It does not extend outward into the decisions of others, regardless of how clear those decisions may appear from the outside. Once this is understood, the need to intervene begins to lose its urgency. What remains is a focus on maintaining one's own position. There is a tendency to believe that persistence can break through resistance, that repeated effort will eventually lead to understanding. Yet, the Stoic sees how often this effort returns to the same point. The same reasoning is applied. The same resistance appears. The same outcome follows. This repetition reveals something important. The barrier is not a lack of explanation. It is a lack of willingness to examine. That willingness cannot be forced from the outside. It must arise from within the person experiencing the pattern. Epictetus approached this from the perspective of response when he said, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And within that idea, there is a return to responsibility that remains within the Stoic. The behavior of others does not dictate the Stoic's state. Their reactions do. This shifts the focus away from changing external circumstances and back toward maintaining internal control. The situation may remain unchanged, yet the Stoic's position within it becomes stable. There is a second layer that requires attention. One that is less visible yet more influential. The urge to control often comes from discomfort rather than necessity. Watching someone move toward a predictable outcome creates tension. That tension seeks resolution. It pushes a person toward involvement, toward correction, toward action. The Stoic observes this movement, recognizing that it originates internally. Managing this discomfort becomes the task rather than acting on it. When this internal pressure is understood, something begins to shift. The need to step in weakens. The impulse to correct loses its intensity. The Stoic remains aware of what is happening yet does not feel compelled to alter it. This does not remove concern. It refines it. It places it within the boundary of what can actually be influenced. Beyond that boundary, the Stoic remains steady, allowing events to unfold without interference. Attempts to control what lies outside this boundary often lead to entanglement. They draw attention away from one's own path and place it into cycles that do not lead forward. The Stoic recognizes this early and adjusts accordingly. They remain within their own scope, maintaining discipline over their own actions, their own responses, and their own direction. This position preserves energy. It prevents unnecessary involvement in outcomes that cannot be shaped externally. As this understanding settles, the illusion begins to fade. Control is no longer projected outward. It is held inward where it can be maintained without resistance. Others continue to move according to their own patterns, repeating decisions that lead to familiar outcomes, while the Stoic remains grounded, observing without interference and maintaining a position that is not influenced by what lies beyond their reach. There is a point where all external movement loses its authority, where noise, reaction, and instability continue to exist, yet no longer dictate direction. And that point is not found outside. It is built within. The Stoic arrives there through repetition, through observation, through the gradual removal of dependence on what cannot be controlled. What once felt urgent begins to slow. What once felt necessary begins to lose its weight. The world continues as it always has. Unpredictable and often disordered. Yet the Stoic no longer follows its rhythm. They establish their own, grounded in something that does not shift with circumstance. Epictetus captured this foundation with direct force when he said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And within that statement, there is no condition attached. No exception made. No external factor that changes its truth. Freedom is internal. It is built through control over thought, response, and action. The Stoic does not look outward for stability. They construct it piece by piece, until it becomes something that does not break under pressure. This construction is not visible in a single moment. It forms over time through decisions that align with discipline rather than impulse. Self-mastery becomes the central focus. Not as an abstract idea, but as a daily practice that shapes every interaction. The Stoics watch their thoughts as they form, noticing where they move, how they react, and what they attach to. This observation creates space for adjustment. It allows clear thinking to take the place of automatic reaction. Over time, this process strengthens control. It builds a position that is not easily disrupted by external movement. There are moments where the external world attempts to pull attention away from this position. Where disorder becomes loud. Where reactions become intense. Where others move quickly from one state to another without pause. The Stoic sees this clearly without needing to match it. They remain where they are, grounded in a state that does not shift with every change around them. This steadiness is not rigid. It is adaptive without being reactive. It allows movement without losing direction. Marcus Aurelius approached this from the quality of internal life when he wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." And within that idea, there is a direct link between inner state and lived experience. The Stoic does not wait for the external world to create peace. They shape it through their own thinking. When thoughts remain steady, the experience remains steady. When thoughts become disordered, the experience follows. Control begins at this level, long before action takes place. Detachment becomes a form of protection. Not from reality, but from unnecessary influence. The Stoic does not absorb every reaction. They do not internalize every opinion. They do not carry every outcome that appears in front of them. They remain aware yet separate. This separation allows them to move through situations without becoming defined by them. It preserves their position. It maintains their direction. It keeps their internal state intact. When others move toward instability, the Stoic does not follow. When voices rise, they do not escalate. When patterns repeat, they do not become part of them. This creates distance that is not visible externally, yet it shapes every outcome internally. The Stoic remains grounded while others fluctuate, holding a position that is not dependent on agreement, approval, or validation. This position becomes their strength. Over time, this discipline builds something that does not need to be reinforced constantly. It becomes natural. The Stoic moves through situations without being pulled into them, maintaining direction even when everything around them shifts. Their control remains internal, where it cannot be taken, where it cannot be disrupted by external change. This is where stability is found. Not in the world, but within the person moving through it. As this sovereignty settles into place, the need to control others fades completely. The Stoic no longer looks outward for adjustment. They remain focused on their own state, their own conduct, their own direction, while everything around them continues to unfold according to its own structure, leaving them grounded within themselves as the movement continues.